This terrible case shocked the whole of Great Britain with its inhumanity. The famous writer disappeared without a trace, and the police had no leads. It soon became clear that they were dealing with a cruel and unfair crime, the details of which could shock anyone. Helen Elizabeth Bailey was born in 1964 in the small English village of Ponte. She grew up there and graduated from high school. From an early age, the girl loved to keep diaries, describing in them almost everything that happened around. After school, Helen went to study in London. At first she wanted to become a medical examiner and even got a degree in physiology. However, after postgraduate studies and practice at the London Clinical Hospital, she decided that such a job was not suitable for her. Helen wanted her activities to be related to creativity. Soon the future writer really had such an opportunity. Helen took part in the creation of several famous cartoon characters, including Garfield. She also worked on characters for Nintendo games. In 1987, she met John Sinfield, the head of a licensing company that worked with such famous brands as Snoopy, Garfield and others. After some time they started dating, and in 1996 they got married. After the wedding, they bought a large house in a prestigious area of London. Around the same time, Helen began writing short stories, which later formed the basis of her famous book series. In the 2008 year, she released the first book in the series The Mad World of Electro Brown, which subsequently brought the writer wide popularity among teenage girls. In the next 2 years, Helen wrote 4 more books from this series. In the 2010 year, she was nominated for an award, which is given to authors of popular teen books. In total, she has published 22 books in her career. It seemed that a happy and carefree future awaited the couple. But in February of the 2011 year, an unexpected tragedy happened. The couple were vacationing in Barbados, and one day Helen's husband drowned in the sea. This event actually broke Helen. After 15 years of marriage, she couldn't imagine what to do next. She later wrote that she could not hold back tears almost every day when she left the house. To cope with her grief, she began to lead a personal blog, which she shared her thoughts and experiences. Helen also joined a Facebook group that included people who had lost loved ones. It was there in October of the 2011 year that the writer met Ian Stewart. The man had recently lost his wife and was raising 2 sons alone, 15 and 18 years old. They talked for a long time, and at some point there was sympathy between them. In the end, they decided to meet in person, went to the cinema, had dinner and took a walk in the park. Despite the fact that the date went great, Helen decided that she was not ready for a new relationship yet. Ian reacted to this with understanding, and they continued to communicate on the internet. But soon the couple met again, and during one of the walks, Helen realized that she did not want to lose this man. Since then they started dating and at some point decided to move in together. They bought a new house for living together, because it was uncomfortable for Helen to live with a new lover in the house that she had once separated from her now deceased husband. Ian sold his old house for £500,000, and he and Helen bought a new one for £1.5 million, where they began life together. Stewart's sons also lived with them. Over the next 5 years, the couple's relationship only grew stronger, and Helen wrote that life was really starting to get better. She has released several more books, including her first work aimed at an adult audience. In the book, she actually reflected her path from a state of complete loss and endless grief to a new happiness. Everything was going really well, and Helen was already discussing with friends her plans for the upcoming wedding. However, in April of the 2016 year, an unexpected thing happened. A woman disappeared after going for a walk with her dog. Her disappearance became known after Ian Stewart called the police. This call seemed strange to the police. It seemed that the man could not remember any distinctive signs of a woman with whom he had been in a relationship for 5 years. The operator asked him to name Helen's height, and her phone numbers and eye color. Stewart couldn't remember any of this. He couldn't even give her date of birth. According to him, Helen left a note in which she asked to give her time to be alone and not try to contact her. She was allegedly going to go to their cottage in the town of Bosters, but the writer did not appear there. The man also could not give the exact address of the cottage that he and Hel owned together. The police combed the cottage, but there was no sign of Helen there. The writer also had a house in Kent, but she did not appear there either. The police had no other leads, so the search actually stopped. It wasn't until April 16, 5 days after Helen disappeared, that something interesting happened. Her smartphone briefly connected to a Wi-Fi router in a cottage in Kent. This led the police to believe that the woman was all right, and she really arrived at her house. At the same time, the police discovered that the writer's bank account had requests for money withdrawals. It could also indicate that everything is fine with her, but for some reason she does not want to get in touch. Her credit card was also used several times. However, the police remained skeptical about everything that was happening, and every day they looked more and more at Ian Stewart as a suspect. His behavior seemed strange from the very beginning. He didn't even know the date of birth of the woman he had lived with for 5 years. In subsequent interviews, he also could not recall almost any details of the day when Helen disappeared. And strangest of all, he told the police that he accidentally lost the note she left. As for these interviews that Ian gave to journalists, they were filled with emotional speeches and tears. The man said that he could not imagine his future life without Helen. I turned to her with requests to return home. He even promised to bring her her beloved dog if she asked, just to see her alive and unharmed. Against the background of all this, his act a few months after the disappearance of the writer looks extremely strange. Ian went on vacation to Spain for 2 weeks. They planned this trip together with Helen, having bought tickets in advance. Relatives and acquaintances of the writer, who continued to live with a heavy burden of ignorance, were outraged by such an act. How could a man who a few days ago in tears begged Helen to come home, go on vacation to another country? For the police, this step was just another confirmation that they should dig deeper in the direction of Ian. On the 11th of July, exactly 3 months after the disappearance of the writer, detectives came to his house and arrested Ian Stewart. All this was filmed on camera. When the charges were read to him, the man's legs gave way and he sat down on the steps. We suggest you take a look at these frames. According to investigators, he killed Helen Bailey in order to take possession of her property and savings, of which there were many. When questioned at the police station, Stewart denied his guilt, while detectives combed their house and the surrounding area. And these searches have borne fruit. On the 15th of July, the body of Helen Bailey was found in a cesspool, which was located on the site of their house. There was also her beloved dog next to the woman's body. Medical experts determined that the woman died from suffocation. That's just they could not determine whether the writer was alive at the time when she was thrown into the pit. The police have already searched the house and the territory several times, but they simply did not see this pit. The fact is that Stewart parked Helen's Jeep right over the pit. With an impressive set of evidence on hand, the investigators tried to get a confession. During the interrogation, everything the police had was laid out in front of Ian, but the man just sat with a lost look and did not answer questions. The detectives had one more question to answer. If Stewart killed Helen for personal gain, why did he wait 5 long years? The answer was too obvious. In the year 2012, Helen left a will, according to which all her property and savings should be transferred to relatives and a close friend. However, in the 2014 year, she changed the document, writing Stewart's name there. Now most of her money and property were to go to him. Thus, in the event of Helen's death, Stewart was to become the owner of savings, assets and real estate totaling about £5 million. This huge figure would allow him to live in luxury and not deny himself anything. Soon medical experts discovered another terrible fact. For several months, Ian drugged Helen with sleeping pills, which he bought for himself according to a doctor's prescription. The woman noticed that something was happening to her, as evidenced by several search queries on the internet. She wondered why she was always sleepy. One day, a man mixed her a large amount of the drug, after which he ended her life and hid her body in a pit. Then he began gradually withdrawing money from her bank account to their common one, and also tried to sell one of the houses that Helen owned, but without her presence, he did not succeed. The trial of Ian Stewart began in January 2017. Instead of admitting his guilt, he came up with a frankly ridiculous story in an attempt to avoid punishment. According to him, in fact, Helen and her dog were abducted by 2 men named Nick and John. They allegedly demanded a ransom of £500,000, and Stewart did not report it to the police for fear that they might kill Helen. Of course, no one believed this story. On February 22, 2017, the court found him guilty of the murder of Helen Bailey and sentenced him to life in prison. The criminal will have the opportunity to apply for early release only at the age of 90. Immediately after that, detectives began investigating the suspicious death of Stewart's ex-wife, who died in the 2010 year. Now law enforcement agencies admit that the man could also have been stuffing her with drugs for a long time, until the poor woman had an epileptic seizure. However, it will be difficult to prove his guilt. The woman was cremated. Despite this, the police and the court continue to dig into this case. Stewart was formally arrested on suspicion of murdering his wife. His trial will take place in the year 2022. In any case, this ruthless and calculating monster will spend the rest of his life in prison. His sons, who had not the slightest idea about their father's act, are now forced to live with this heavy burden. This story shows us how low a person can sink in the pursuit of wealth. Helen Bailey just wanted to fix her life after her husband's death and get rid of endless grief. For several years she thought she had succeeded. The writer had no idea that the man she loved with all her heart had originally planned to kill her and rob her. This case can rightfully be called not just unfair, but also vile. It is so base that it is simply impossible to draw any conclusions. Take care of yourself and thank you for watching.